Hello, welcome to Journey Through the Ages. That's what I was doing before. But now I am joined by a lovely panel of guests. We got Turbine, DK, Emmy, Plo, and Blue. And also we have Historic Ships, but Historic Ships internet's not working at the moment, but he will be coming in and out at some point. And normally we're all the gang from History Inside a Nutshell, but since we're doing Journey Through the Ages this time round, we thought we'd just do a little bit something differently. But Turbine, you were the one that came up with this video idea. Can you tell us a bit more about it before we start?
Okay, so if you don't know, there's this channel called Alternate History Hub, which summarizes what if that wasn't the history that wasn't meant to be. And today we're watching a video of his called "What If Germany Was Split After World War II?" So for context, you know how like we had the East and West Germany after World War II and the aforementioned and the Cold War, but there were many different plans that were considered for the fate of Germany after the war, and he'll be talking about one of these theories. And yeah, the play out of that is going to be honestly horrifying to think about. But nevertheless, without further ado, I feel like we should get started.
After 2 world wars, everyone was done with Germany. And even as World War II was ongoing, there were plans of what to do with Germany once the fighting had ended. Now, as we know, Germany was divided between the 4 victors, and the tensions of the Cold War eventually split it into 2 states. It makes sense why Germany was split in the way that it was, considering the Soviets held that territory. And so we never really think of it going different. How else could anyone have imagined it being divided? Turns out a few had their own ideas on how to split the Germans, each making their own lines on a map about what a post-war Germany should look like. There were multiple plans, so I and another alternate history channel, What If All Hist, decided to pick a different plan. Each of us would pick one plan and then theorize how that specific map would turn out in history. FDR had a plan to just entirely dissolve Germany, reorganizing it into smaller states. Not quite as small as in the Holy Roman Empire, but small enough. What If Alt Hist theorizes about how such a plan might pan out in his own video, so go check that out. There was also a plan by good old Churchill to split Germany north to south, with the south being a horrific abomination. Oh god, guess Churchill drank a bit too much.
Austria-Hungary!
Yeah,
but in regards to Winston Churchill's plan to break up Germany, I will add context. Basically, there was supposed to be a northern Germany, and it would have kept somewhat of its territory before the war began. Maybe even a bit more, I don't remember. But as you've seen in Western Germany, I think it was supposed to be a bit more of an international zone. And the abomination of southern Germany, which was going to be called the Confederation of the Danube. And essentially, as it suggests, it was contained Bavaria, Austria, and Hungary, because apparently Churchill loved Austria-Hungary together, or was not sober enough at the time. And it also would have contained a small amount of present-day Ukraine, and if it had gone through, it would have not only started a war, but would have never gotten past. So there's a bit more context.
I don't think that Russia would have allowed that, considering their whole idea of a buffer zone. They wouldn't want any sort of powerful Germanic nation to exist. Because in the running along the Danube, that's a lot of powerful geography there at play.
Yeah, that's kind of why I said it would start another war.
Stalin would have been very happy about that one.
Yeah, Stalin would not be happy. I love how Churchill's represented by Sir Topham Hatt, or the Fat Controller from Thomas. Okay.
Well, at least it's the classic era one, which actually had authority.
True.
Okay, let's just continue.
Come on. Yeah, go ahead, Davis.
Felt sentimental about the days gone by, when Austria-Hungary still existed. Yet there was one plan that, even though it hadn't been implemented, it did have real-world consequences, and it was considered a plan from the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, of all people, Henry Morgenthau. Morgenthau wanted to divide Germany alongside the North and South lines as well, but with one major difference. The industrial heartland of Germany in the West, the source of its economic and militaristic strength, would be entirely removed from the borders. A deliberate plan to fundamentally alter German society, not only in denazification, but to remove its capability to ever be a modern nation again. What if in an alternate timeline, somehow, this plan was agreed upon? The Morgenthau plan. It's an alternate 1945. The war is over. Yep.
The one where they, I think if I'm not mistaken, it was estimated that about 25 million Germans would die of starvation and disease because like the sheer loss of food security. Yeah,
they would have brought. He brings it up later on.
Yeah, that's a yikes.
But,
wow.
Okay, let's.
I would imagine that in this timeline, the plan for what would happen to Germany is entirely unknown to the public. The Morgenthau plan is not leaked to the press, mostly because, if it still is, it faces the same scrutiny that it did in our timeline. This is a scenario where the Western powers are much harsher to Germany and fully commit to absolute revenge. It was hard to simply let many aspects of German society continue on after so much destruction had occurred. There was no real urge to follow through with the Morgenthau plan, for reasons I'm going to get into. And this was stemmed from fears of the plan failing so badly that it would only backfire in the face of the West, undoing all of the gains that they made during the war. Not only out of a worry that Nazism would resurface, but also that the German public would turn to the Soviets and communism in response. In such a timeline, let's imagine these considerations are just not thought about. Over the course of the next few years, the Americans, British, and French would begin the deconstruction and demolition of any factory or manufacturing plant in the region. A region that Germany relied on for not simply wartime production, but production of everyday basic goods. You know, the factories that we need for a modern society.
Ooh, Joker!
The Joker!
Production would protest
Didn't expect that.
perhaps leading to riots and open rebellion, only to be brutally taken down by occupation forces. The Allied forces would then proceed to tell people living in this international zone, and this was the plan, by the way, I'm not making this up, that the German people would never again be allowed to have manufacturing or industry at all. Those that relied on the factories for jobs should move elsewhere instead. In effect, this plan was to remove the capability for millions of working men to provide for their families. No factories of any kind would be allowed to exist in what was once the industrial heartland of Germany. And the thing was, this was an action that Morgenthau fully anticipated, as what he essentially planned was bringing an industrial state back into an agricultural society. As for the rest of Germany, it would be split between North and South. The idea was to differentiate between the heavily Catholic South and the Prussian Protestant North. Somehow Prussia still exists in this timeline, so you take some and you leave some. I would imagine this North German state would be smaller than originally planned, just by how much advancement the Soviet troops made. And it's likely it may have been split into even 3 states. And such a confusing mess between the 3 wouldn't really be a concern, as Germany being a functioning state isn't in the question. Germany is no longer meant to be a state. This perpetual occupation was what turned many off of the idea of the Morgenthau plan in the first place, and Churchill even commented that he didn't want the British tied to what was essentially a dead corpse. As what happens when you remove the industry from a society? You remove the ability for anybody to feed themselves or make a living, and you essentially created a humanitarian crisis.
Okay, I'll stop there for a second, because this is something I really want to point out. This is from the TV show Horrible Histories. Has anyone watched the show Horrible Histories by chance?
Oh yeah, I used to watch it.
I haven't.
No.
Okay.
I have.
Okay, so for those who haven't, it's basically a television series, a BBC television series based on books by Terry Pratchett, I think. And he wrote Tony Robinson. Anyway, Terry Russell. Anyway, and it's a comedy sketch series about like history. And looking at the bits now, it reminds me of the little MasterChef sketch of what people from different parts of history cook. And there was this German woman from World War II that had to ration food because Germany always had to ration their food to save them from starving. And one of the foods that they couldn't find to eat, but they had to eat, was animals from Berlin Zoo, unless that they starve. And it always reminds me of that for some reason. And yeah, it was true, same as the alternative universe, that Germany is in danger of starvation and poverty because of how they were doing in the war. Because in both world wars, they did terribly. They did terribly.
Yeah, they did.
Resource shortages in both world wars were terrible, especially during World War I due to the British offshore occupations. I mean, literally thousands were dying a month due to starvation and disease. And I mean, Germany had run out of essential resources such as silver by the year 1917. They were unable to produce anymore because of just how much the war exerted on them in both cases.
With the Morgenthau Plan, there is no room for foreign aid to the Germans. The people were now a part of an agrarian state and should use that to their advantage. However, there's an issue. Poor harvests and the lack of production of fertilizer in the post-war years resulted in food frankly not being existent. Germany, even in our own timeline, didn't have the capability to feed its own people. Yet there was no American aid in this alternate world. Instead, the plan continues on. So here's the thing. It has been estimated that if the Morgenthau Plan continued on as it was planned, an estimated 25 million people would have starved to death.
Damn.
5 times as many Germans would die in the Allied occupation than in the war itself. So at this point, it's pretty clear that had the actual Morgenthau Plan gone through, and it was apparent that so many people were going to starve to death, the Allies would have backed off such a harsh plan. They weren't going to just let millions starve to death in the middle of Europe. But let's say that they did anyway. It's not like the Germans could, fight back. First off, imagine how exactly it would appear following the war, when the victorious Allied powers, in this case, the Western powers, occupy Germany and simply stand by and watch as millions die under their control. It would be an atrocity even greater than the Holodomor, actually, by many more millions.
Hold on. Okay, so for context, the Holodomor was basically something where, the Soviets were, trying to crack down on, the kulaks or, farmers in the Soviet Union, and I believe they took away a lot of the grain, and it caused a lot of people to starve to death.
I think it was to target Ukrainian. It was also to target Ukrainian nationalists affair because there were some Ukrainian nationalist movements, especially in the 30s, and a lot of the lack of grain occurred around Ukraine, especially around the western half.
That hits really differently in 2024 in a bad way.
Yeah, Russia and Ukraine haven't really had a bad relationship.
Yeah, but I feel like we should just go back a few seconds again and then continue. Sorry for the interruption, folks. Enjoy the reaction.
The Holodomor, actually, by many more millions. In fact, it'd mean that the Western powers would have killed just as many innocents as the Nazis in Russia or the Japanese in China. So by doing this, by committing to this, the Western powers in many ways immediately lose their validity after the war. To the German people, they were brainwashed by the Nazi regime and told that if the war was lost, German society would die, along with everyone they knew and loved. Yet, post-war, the German people instead saw the American occupation with planes flying in food when they were hungry, a plan to rebuild their society, and a removal of an ideology that only brought them pain. Now instead, in this alternate timeline, the Americans tear down the factories, internationalize a large chunk of their country, split Germany in two, and then their troops openly parade in the streets and sit by while a quarter of the population openly and slowly starves to death. So, had this plan actually continued, the victorious Allies would have committed equal atrocities to the Nazis, or at least enough atrocities to muddle the waters in the most black and white good versus evil war ever. The end of World War II would not be the end of Nazism or fascism within Germany. In fact, it would only openly solidify Nazi propaganda against the Americans. For the Germans, the war would have been seen as one of self-defense against a ruthless cabal that the Nazis were talking about. And now, the Americans were going to kill everyone. God, this video is gonna get demonetized so bad. And in fact,
no kidding there.
You don't like that sort of stuff.
Of World War I, a nation once again defeated, but the ideology continues on. There is no scenario where it's split in two and then reunited and becomes the undisputed leader of Europe. There is no EU. Any chance that it may, in a way, be integrated into the West, snuffed out after such a failed occupation. And so this is a part of a lesson. The peace after a war is often more important than any battle or conflict, especially in a war of ideologies. To win a conflict, you can't simply outproduce your enemy or beat them on the battlefield. And not only did fascism need to collapse under its own weight, and for its former supporters to see it for the sham that it was, there also needed to be a replacement ideology to step in and fundamentally better the society afterwards. This was in many ways why the West went with the Marshall Plan instead. By rebuilding Germany and showing them how the Americans and British were not the corrupt monsters Hitler had portrayed them to be, it allowed for the transition into a democratic state to be easier, more homegrown. And one example to show the benefits of democracy was by bringing in truckloads of food to a starving population. Yes, you can argue this was to prevent the Germans from turning to the Soviets, but it was also to delegitimize the fear-mongering the fascists had brainwashed the population with for years. This was a crucial junction point for Germany, and if the worst-case scenario of World War II was the Nazis winning, the second worst-case scenario would be if people thought the Nazis, by accident, were proven correct. And to a terrifying degree, many would begin to think Germany was better off under the Nazis because at least they had food. The democratic institutions put in place are not really supported by the people, and if they are, they're only increasingly right-wing or left. No hearts and minds are one. The German republics are seen simply as puppets. And as what happens with any puppet, once the hand is taken out, it goes limp. While this video is about World War II, this more importantly is a video about institutions and ideologies. Institutions only have credibility if people have faith in them. If the Morgenthau Plan had gone through, it would have given the Germans their first view of democracy, one as a punishment, a distinct negative in their lives. And this would cause a hatred that only undermines the very governments set up as replacements for the Nazis. If a government is only held up by foreign force, then it's simply a puppet, and it will collapse easily once the occupational force leaves. Every single time. This is Cody of Alternate History Hub.
I just want to say, when I watched this video for the first time in full, that ending hit so hard that I nearly choked up when I watched it, because
Really?
it's scary.
Oh, really?
Because it's scary to think. Because it's scary to think, like, if this went through, the world could have been in a much scarier place than it actually was. And that ending there. What?
Oh, sorry for interrupting. No, you carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, but when you really think about it, at the end where he says, like, every single time, once the occupationists leave, that sounds exactly, and maybe cut this out in the video, but, because this might be a little hotly debated, but when you look at what America did in the Middle East with Syria, Iraq, and maybe even South Vietnam during the Vietnam War, you could attribute that to what the United States did, and you can see how failure that was when we look back at this video. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why it hit hard to me.
I think as well it kind of shows like how easily things, especially in politics and in history, how easily things can go dark. Like you got this very fine line. It was like a difference of a single proposal between this incredibly dark outlook where literally tens of millions of people die and an entire region of the world is made destitute. And then, of course, you've got what happened in history, what actually happened, which was arguably, of course, much better alternative, wherein Germany was helped, they were able to improve. I think it shows, I guess, as I said, like just how easily things can change. I mean, you can even see it, for example, with the Soviet Union, how quickly that rose and fell practically overnight. And even with, for example, the country that we're discussing, the Nazi Germany, I mean, all it took was one thing, really, in the grand scheme of things, all it took was the Enabling Act. And after that, basically, the Weimar government was powerless to stop the advance of the Nazis. And of course, that was probably one of the most horrific 12 years of Europe's history. So
that it was. But otherwise, that was the video.
I think we're definitely going to have to put it up quite soon. But yeah, that was really great, Turbine. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. Thoughts, comments, anyone on this video?
My mic is muted the whole time.
What?
I think that just says it all, really, from my end, really.
On my end.
All right. Otherwise,
one thing that I can just say is, I'm so glad this plan didn't come through, and I'm glad I'm living in Germany today.
Yes. Yes, we would absolutely want that.
If that would have come through, I would have never gotten the chance to meet any of you here.
Yeah. And we'd probably be living in a much darker world. A very dark world.
Yeah.
It could be almost like the same what Ukraine's going through with Russia as well. That's almost like the same thing, I guess.
Mm-hmm. But I guess that was it.
Yeah, I guess that was it. Well, thank you so much to the Turbine for suggesting the video, and hopefully we'll do more reactions like this very, very soon. But until then, I know we're going to be posting videos a lot because we haven't posted through the videos for the channel, but I'm going to try and make sure we get videos once a month. My dog's going to get fed. This is you rattle of food. Anyway, we are going to try and upload a video once a month, and until then, I will see you, everyone will see you next month. But don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more future videos. And if you would like to check out more active videos, check on the channel History Inside a Nutshell. And again, give it a like and subscribe. And until then, we will catch you very soon. Take care, guys. Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.